In the violent battle between Russia and Ukraine, things aren't always clear. Russia has gained territory, but the price is rising. Russia's resources are running out, its military is deteriorating, and its traditional allies are abandoning it. Russian failure is becoming apparent on the battlefield and in global politics as Kharkiv becomes the hub of conflict. Alliances with North Korea and seeking aid from China show desperation. Russia may be gaining ground, but can it survive a world turning its back? War scenario. Let's start with the war's practicalities and how Russia is losing it. That may not be obvious. Russia has gained territory in Ukraine despite constant opposition. It controls Mariupol, Melitopol, and Donetsk in the Donbass area. Russia is waging offensives in Kharkiv to progressively move the war's front lines toward Kyiv. This Kharkiv combat shows the first signs of a Russian loss. As Al Jazeera reported at the end of June 2024, Russia and Ukraine were stalemated in that region, with Putin's usual policy of throwing as many men as he could at the struggle in hopes of overwhelming Ukraine. Russia lost territory in its recent offensive, allowing Ukraine to retake Vovchansk and Taik. In June, Ukrainian Colonel Yuri Pravka said Ukraine had pinned down dozens of Russian soldiers in Vovchansk and could push Russia back. Is this important? After all, the conflict has had similar ups and downs, and Russia has always kept advancing. Can Russia sustain the war's slow burn? Many factors make that improbable, starting with Ukraine's steady Western help. Ukraine received $61 billion in military funding from the U.S. Congress in April, in addition to billions from its European allies. Security contract. Ukraine had better news on June 13th. It made numerous long-term security agreements with big states at G7. It has a decade-long pact with a new ally, Japan, which pledged $4.5 billion in military, financial, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine in the second half of 2024. The other 10-year pact was with the U.S. The headline says the U.S. will back Ukraine for at least a decade. There are even rumors that NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg may require all NATO nations to contribute help to Ukraine to ensure its reliability and scale. Other aid includes loans, with the G7 summit allowing the U.S. to give a $50 billion loan secured by interest on over $300 billion in frozen Russian assets. Everything points to a long war, and the longer it lasts, the less likely a Russian triumph is. Putin's alliance building shows Russian desperation. The June 2024 Russia-North Korea defensive deal shows that. According to Johns Hopkins University historian Sergei Rodchenko in The Guardian, such an agreement shows Putin's desperation. Russian military might be a paper tiger after the Ukrainians demonstrated it, thus buying weaponry in North Korea, a disdained client state, is humiliating. Looking for Russian buddies. Russia's reliance on North Korea as an ally underscores its desperation amid mounting challenges. By aligning with a geopolitical outcast, Putin risks further sanctions and weakens ties with key nations like South Korea. This partnership highlights Russia's dire military shortages, which Putin himself acknowledged in June 2023. Equipment deficits span precision-guided missiles, drones, and even basic supplies, exacerbated by sanctions that limit access to critical components. Ukraine's Ministry of Finance estimates massive Russian losses, including over 800 tanks and 15,000 armored vehicles, though these figures may be inflated. Regardless, Russia's production cannot keep pace, annually producing 500-600 tanks, but losing up to 1,000. This shortfall forces reliance on outdated Soviet-era equipment, which cannot match Ukraine's modernized arsenal bolstered by Western support. China, despite being a logical ally, has withheld substantial military aid to avoid provoking international backlash and jeopardizing its trade with the West. While Chinese companies reportedly assist with drone development, Beijing's mistrust of Moscow and focus on its economic interests limit cooperation. U.S.-led sanctions have further pressured Chinese firms, reducing their dealings with Russia. North Korea provides a temporary solution, but at a steep cost. China's dominance over Russia has grown, with the yuan now accounting for 54% of Russian stock market trades and 90% of critical imports like sensors and radar components. Should Beijing fully withdraw support, Russia's military-industrial complex would face catastrophic setbacks. In pursuing short-term survival, Russia sacrifices long-term geopolitical influence. North Korea gains from the alliance, but China benefits most, tightening its grip on a weakened Russia. Even a victory in Ukraine would leave Moscow isolated, economically strained, and geopolitically diminished. War harmed the economy. The Wilson Center highlights how Putin initially built his power in the early 2000s by steering Russia out of economic crisis and achieving stability through the 2000s and 2010s. However, this legacy has unraveled. Following the invasion of Ukraine, many Western firms exited Russia through fire sales, halting modernization. Manufacturing quality has plummeted, with basic safety features like airbags and anti-lock brakes no longer produced. The Ukraine war has worsened conditions for Russians. Counter-sanctions on food imports have driven up consumer prices, and the national bank struggles with high interest rates and a weakened currency. Additionally, shortages of parts have crippled Western military and commercial aviation within Russia. Economically, the war has turned Russia into the resource colony Putin once feared. While Russia's trade with China exceeded $240 billion in 2023, it imports more from China than it exports. Payments in rupees or yuan, currencies Russia struggles to convert, reinforce this imbalance. At the 2023 China-U.S. summit, President Xi Jinping acknowledged Russia's diminished status, suggesting it serves primarily as a resource provider in a global order dominated by the U.S. and China. William Pomerantz of the Kennan Institute points out that Putin's war strategy has not only degraded Russia's global standing, but also risks devastating its economy long after the conflict ends. Russian migration wave. Russia faces significant losses regardless of the Ukraine war's outcome, according to Reynald Foucault, a senior economics lecturer at Lancaster University. Despite a reported GDP growth of 5.5% in Q3 2023, this growth is driven by war expenditures, including military salaries, equipment, and compensation for casualties. The war now dominates Russia's economic activity, masking deeper issues such as a severe labor shortage of approximately 5 million workers and rampant inflation. Even if Russia wins the war, it will face a $486 billion rebuilding cost amid persistent Ukrainian separatist resistance and ongoing sanctions. A loss would similarly devastate the economy, as the war's end would eliminate its primary economic driver. Western nations would also prioritize funding Ukraine's recovery, further isolating Russia. The war has sparked internal dissent, with over 1 million Russians fleeing conscription by mid-2023. Public support for the war is waning, especially among younger generations. While 73% of Russians supported Putin's special military operation in November 2023, only 39% expressed unwavering support, down from 53% in March 2022. Among those under 25, just 30% unreservedly backed the war, compared to 56% of those aged 65 or older. This generational divide is significant, as younger Russians, most likely to be conscripted, are also the least supportive of the war. With diminishing domestic support and a strained economy, Putin faces a no-win situation, with potential long-term consequences for his power, regardless of the war's outcome. Russia is disunited. In March 2024, Garry Kasparov, chess grandmaster and co-founder of the Free Russia Forum, warned that Russia's borders might not survive if Ukraine wins the war. Now living in exile, like over 1 million others who fled Russia since the conflict began, Kasparov suggested regions like Dagestan, Chechnya, Tatarstan and Bashkortostan could seek independence, driven largely by economic forces. He argued that promoting the idea of a united and indivisible Russia no longer reflects reality. This sentiment was echoed in an unofficial referendum on self-determination in February 2024, where 5 Russian-controlled regions voted for independence: Kaliningrad, 72.1%, the Urals, 68.2%, Ingria, 66.2%, Siberia, 63.9%, and Kuban, 55.7%. While these results are not legally binding and may be biased, they highlight growing dissatisfaction within Russia's territories. Russia's weakening territorial grip coincides with its struggles in Ukraine, compounded by Western support for Ukraine and Russia's reliance on aid from North Korea and a cautious China. Internationally, Russia's image as a geopolitical power is eroding, and internally, younger generations and peripheral regions are increasingly disillusioned with Putin's policies. As its war effort falters, Russia faces mounting economic, political, and territorial challenges that threaten its stability. Russia, unmasked paper tiger. Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski told the SEM in April 2024 that a war between Russia and NATO would be futile for Russia. Sikorski emphasized that NATO's defensive pact ensures any attack on a member would result in Russia's defeat. NATO possesses 3 times the military forces, 3 times the aerial resources, and 4 times the naval strength compared to Russia, with the U.S. Navy displacing 4.5 million tons versus Russia's 1.2 million tons. Russia's military weaknesses, exposed during its invasion of Ukraine, further diminish its prospects. Historian Timothy Snyder notes that Russia's reputation as a military power is largely propaganda, citing its defeats in the Polish-Soviet War of 1920, its struggles during World War II without Allied support, and its failure in Afghanistan. The Ukraine war underscores that Russia's perceived power on paper does not translate into real-world success. Russia faces equipment shortages and growing reliance on North Korea for aid, deepening its international isolation. Even China, its potential ally, remains cautious in avoiding Western sanctions, leaving Russia economically weakened and politically vulnerable. As domestic dissatisfaction with President Putin rises, Russia appears increasingly unprepared to confront NATO or its member nations, regardless of the outcome in Ukraine. While Russia has achieved some success on the battlefield, the reality is that the country is facing unprecedented difficulties. Will Russia's moves lead to victory or simply put it in a more difficult position? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Russia will overcome these challenges, or is it edging closer to defeat? And thank you for watching until the end.